Now, the next point is something that's really important. Something that came out through mainstream media, but yet nonetheless is pretty apparent, pretty readily available with all the information in front of us, that there are clear, and actually I talked about this first part of it back in March, which is kind of the first part where this starts because this led into the second part. Now, if you remember, I talked about this when it came out. White House pushes U.S. officials to criticize China for coronavirus cover-up. So really early on, in March, by the way, right about the time when they started actually, or rather, weeks after they started doing the one thing they did, they basically were pushing people to criticize China at a time when even less information was available. Because clearly they were all about the evidence, right? No, it's because they wanted to criticize China, as I've been saying from the beginning, whether or not they were behind it. The truth doesn't play into this. That's the narrative. And again, as I've said from the beginning, they very much still could be at fault. But we don't know that, and they're still pushing it anyway. But they're pushing this all the way back in March, saying you guys need to make sure you point to China because we need to, deviate we need to get everybody looking away from how we're utterly failing at what we're trying to accomplish right now. But bring that to today, or rather the 24th, yesterday. GOP memo urges anti-China assault over coronavirus. Now, guys, this is really interesting for a lot of different reasons. The first thing that I take from this, and this is a 57-page strategy document. The concept here is that they are pushing this narrative for political reasons at a time when it's not saying, look, talk about this because this is the truth. They're saying pivot to this when this is addressed. When somebody brings up what Trump didn't do, pivot to this thing about China. And it's not because it's truthful. It's an allegation. It's based on narrative. And that's the point. So at a time before they have any evidence about what's going on, they're basically they're saying we need to point to China at every possible point. Now it says the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Somebody's saying we're buffering bad and they're cutting me off. It looks like I'm okay on my end. So if YouTube is buffering, nothing new there, guys. I apologize for YouTube's utter lack of concern for your constitutional rights. I shouldn't even say it like that because they're not, but their lack of concern for the truth. Because we know that YouTube does this as they actively censor us while we're trying to get to points that their masters of government don't want them to talk about. But either way, we'll get the truth out because I'll never stop. But let's keep going. The National Republican Senatorial Committee has sent campaigns a detailed 57-page memo authored by a top Republican strategist advising GOP candidates to address the coronavirus crisis by aggressively attacking China. I'm gonna keep going. I was gonna check real quick to see if the stream was even. I might as well. Since you're all telling me that the stream has been down. That seems like we're still online, so that's good. We'll keep going. But thank you for those that tried to make me aware. Some people were in the chat were saying that the stream was down or had been cut, so got to check. But let's keep going. So the point is, advising GOP candidates to address the coronavirus crisis by aggressively attacking China, right? Not saying pivot to the truth, but basically the bottom line is just to deviate from what they're talking about. Now the memo, which you can see right here, I'll show you in a moment, includes advice on everything from how to tie Democrat candidates to the Chinese government. Now understand, again, it's not saying that calling out those that are actually tied to China, but basically accusing them, just like Russiagate, just like McCarthyism, the same thing, to deviate from what the people are asking. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like every press briefing I've talked about? How every single time there's a genuine question, they go, well, I did this and I closed the border and no one's there. That's the point, because they're following the talking points, which, by the way, is not new. That's every single government of any point. It's every single administration, for that matter. They always do this because they're always being dishonest, because the truth is never really what they're about. But it says that they're everything from tying Democratic candidates to Chinese government to how to deal with accusations of racism. So when they say, oh, isn't that racist? Well, they have a talking point for that. It stresses three main lines of assault: that China caused the virus by covering it up, which, by the way, there is zero evidence to back up. That's an allegation from the U.S. government. We have sources, trust us, just like everything else they've lied about. Am I saying they didn't cover it up? No, I'm not. I'm saying that there's no evidence to show that. And when you have it, I'll talk about it too. But you're getting the U.S. government that's lied about any number of things, saying we have sources, trust us, that's now saying they covered it up, trust us. And there's nothing to back it up. I mean, at the very least, even within their narrative, you could argue that they just simply didn't know, that they were still going through the evolution of discovery. And because they finally figured it out and they said, well, look, now it's here, they say, oh, well, they lied about it the first time. No, they reported what they knew about. Now, am I saying that that's what happened? No, I'm saying that is a possibility. And the point is that they don't know the difference. They only want it to be China. Why? Because that was the talking point. Because that's what you deviate to when you're trying to cover up what you couldn't accomplish. It says that Democrats are soft on China, right? We're seeing all this right now. And that Republicans will, quote, push for sanctions on China for its role in spreading the pandemic. So yet again, we're talking about sanctions for a country based on the assumptions of the government. I mean, this government has sanctioned people for things that have been shown to be false. They're sanctioning Venezuela, Iran, Syria, all over sanctioning. They're threatening to sanction Germany for daring to do a legal pipeline with Russia. And here they are using sanctions as a political tool, which, by the way, is a crime. These people are criminals. Coronavirus was a Chinese hit and run, followed by a cover-up that cost thousands of lives, the memo states on April 17th. And now you see why that they've been pushing it. The document urges candidates to stay relentlessly on message against the country when responding to any questions about the virus. Not because that's the truth, but because that's what they're supposed to do, because that's the political motivation. When asked whether the spread of the coronavirus is Trump's fault, candidates were advised to respond by pivoting to China, right? Don't defend Trump. Other than the China travel ban, attack China, right? And how many times have we seen that? Every single time we talk about it, what didn't you do this? What did you do in February? Well, the China travel ban and blah, blah. It's not what they're asking. Why do they do it? Because that's what the memo said. Republicans have indicated they plan to make China a centerpiece for the 2020 campaign. We've all seen this, right? They're already coming out with stuff about Biden being close to China, which, by the way, he probably is, but so is Trump. Despite the rhetoric and the narrative, there's obvious ties there that we're not talking about. Advisors of the president say polling shows China-focused attacks would be effective, right? So they pulled it and then decided to do it. Not because it's true, but because they polled and found out that blaming China would be politically beneficial to them. And the reaction, the re-election campaign, it says, has weighed a major TV ad campaign focused on the topic. The memo shows that Republicans are also eager to make China an issue in down-ballot races. So it's a political thing. They're using them as the Russia version of last year's election. That's what they're doing. Or not last year, excuse me, the previous election. It was distributed by the Senate GOP campaign arm, though it was not explicitly drafted by or for the committee. It was authored by the political consultation firm of Brett O'Donnell, a veteran Republican strategist who has advised Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Of course he has. Oh, guess who else? Tom Cotton. Isn't it perfect how it all, these are the very people who are championing this lie, or rather just this unverified claim. I shouldn't say a lie because, again, as I've said, I don't know for sure. Neither do they. They're just saying it because it's an agenda. It just blows my mind that we can see the trail of events where they say, well, just, you got to point to China because we need to blame them, to the point to where they literally author a memo that wasn't supposed to be public, by the way, that is saying, here's how you pivot to China in every possible point. Here's how you blame them. Here's how you make Democrats look like they're tied to China when they're really not. Here's how any number of things. Am I suggesting that there are not politicians that are unnecessarily tied to China? No. I bet you there are Republicans and Democrats just like that. I bet you there are politicians in our country that are illicitly tied to any number of foreign governments. But we only care about it when it's political and in the moment. Oh, I forgot I was going to show you. This is the document. Now, I don't think I actually included this link in the show notes, which I'll add afterward, but it's in the political link that is in the show notes. But this is what it's leading to. China is now sued for $20 trillion for the coronavirus outbreak, by the way, which just so happens to be about the amount of money that the U.S. government really needs. That's just coincidence, though, right? But it says, because China has agreed by treaty to outlaw such weapons, as, bioweapons they're talking about, these actions cannot be official government actions of the People's Republic of China and are not subject to any possible claim of legal immunity from the suit. Okay, so because they agreed behind treaty to make such weapons. So you mean exactly like the US government? You mean exactly like Israeli government? You mean exactly like about 100 other governments in this world that are right now working on bioweapons? Isn't it amazing how they continue to pretend like they're the only one doing this? And by the way, they haven't even proven that. They're taking as at face value that because that's where they're claiming it came from, that they had to have been working on it. But by the way, we know that they did. Why? Because it came from the United States. Because the North Carolina University sold it to them. Because Fort Detrick, when the Pentagon was working with Wuhan on this project. This is the point. They're working together and they're all doing it. But to somehow suggest that this is a lone illegal act by the Chinese government is so incredibly deceptive. And there is nothing in any part of this that has any shred of actual evidence other than just broad circumstantial assumptions that they're actually behind this. But this is political. And until we know for sure, we shouldn't be doing this stuff. But I think we have to realize how obviously this aggressive political push, it should show you that it should at least suggest to you strongly that there's a reason they're pushing for that. They wouldn't need to lie and manipulate and hide things if this was the truth. Something to think about. Here's another example. Renowned microbiologist claims the Wuhan lab, and again, this is being touted by everyone on the right now. Oh, they did absolutely crazy things, which just has to prove that they did it, right? Obviously not. It's the same logic as this story, right? They're doing the exact same thing. You mean those crazy things that they were working on with the US government? Yeah, those crazy things. Doing the same stuff. As he says right here, in China, scientists at the Wuhan laboratory have been actively involved in the development of various coronavirus variants for over 10 years. Yeah, they've been working with the US government. Did he leave that out? Moreover, they did this supposedly not with the aim of creating pathogenic variants, but to study their again, exactly what they're all doing. They're not doing it to get ahead of nature. They're not doing it to make vaccines. They're doing it because they're bioweapons programs, guys. And this is anyone honest will tell you that. It's a mass manipulation, multinational manipulation. They're all doing it. So for this guy to come out and to say that this is somehow indicative, rather that this proves that they're behind it, or even suggest that, is just flimsy at best. Because every single one of these BSL-4 labs are all doing the same absolutely crazy things, as Dr. Boyle will tell you. But this is touted as proof. And again, you line up all of these wildly circumstantial allegations that a lot of them are actually true. It's not even close to proof because they're all applied to basically anywhere. And the only thing that ties it to this area is because that's where it was first noticed, which doesn't prove anything. It could have been planted there. It could have been, I don't want to go off on all the assumptions. The point is that it's not definitive. And I hate that I have to do that. And in many cases, it puts me in a position to actually defend something that I disagree with, because I'm trying to be honest for you guys, like so many people fail to be today. Here's another, and this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. U.S. intelligence officials believe Chinese diplomats may have spread fake texts to cause social unrest. This is the same U.S. intelligence that lied about WMDs, the same U.S. intelligence that lied about Duma, the same U.S. intelligence that lied about Russiagate, the same U.S. intelligence that lied about pretty much everything that I've ever told you about. But yeah, let's listen to them about their assumption about what they may have done to spread fake texts to cause possible social unrest. It's just so ridiculous. They're trying to build their different points of this narrative. So you can point, this is what always happens, is they'll reference things, they'll say something, and then months later they'll say something else, and they'll reference what they said 6 months ago as somehow proof. Pompeo and Bolton are masters at that. And all the proof is what they said 6 months ago. It's not proof of anything. U.S. intelligence believe that they may have done. Look, is it possible that Chinese diplomats spread fake texts to cause unrest? Of course it is. I would say that right now in this obvious battle between U.S. and China, that they're probably both doing it constantly. But to suggest, and if they had proof of it, they would just say it and they would show it to you. But for the U.S. intelligence to say that they believe they may have, gosh darn it, that should be the last thing you look at. That should make you laugh out loud today. But nope, you got an entire part of the fake two-party system touting this as more proof of what we can't prove. And meanwhile, we're being told this thing is mutating out of control and it's all over the place. Coronavirus's ability to mutate has been vastly underestimated, and mutations affect deadliness of the strains, Chinese study finds, which to some people is about as quickly dismissed as this should be, of course, but we should be entertaining all of it. including this ridiculous U.S. intelligence thing, which I've looked into myself, which is as flimsy as I expressed, but you should look into it for yourself. The point is, this is another point that you should be entertaining, but I feel this is the fact. I mean, these things, the idea that this is mutating constantly, first of all, if real, right off the bat should show you it's ridiculous that we're pretending a vaccine is going to mean anything. If it's mutating this quickly, why are they even still working on a vaccine? They are, trust me, and it will be used and it will be forced, but it's mutated, so it won't make any difference. Now, the point is, it says New York may have a deadlier strain imported from Europe, which we've already talked about, compared to less deadly viruses elsewhere in the United States. Now, on the point of these manipulations, the mutations, because that's what we're hearing a lot, there's some very interesting things I want to talk about. Here's a study. And I believe this was, I don't want to misquote it. Where's the date? April 8th. Phylogenetic network analysis of SARS-CoV-2 genomes. Now, I'm going to read this abstract first, and I'll show you the next part. This is really interesting to me. And this suggests that we're dealing potentially with more than one thing here, which I've said from the beginning, which could have potentially been introduced by some foreign party with the intention of, using some ethnically focused weapon against Iran and Italy or something like that. I mean, there's any number of ways it could go, but the point is that somebody somewhere potentially introduced a second variant of this. But it also suggests, or pretty clearly shows, in my opinion, that this didn't start in China. Now, you tell me what you think. Now, it says, what they basically found is there's 3 different strains. According to this study, which again, you shouldn't just blindly believe any study. Or you shouldn't just believe the study that says what you already think, right? You should consider all of them. But they found that they've named basically A, B, and C, the main variants here. With A being the ancestral type, according to the bat outgroup coronavirus. So essentially A is the, original. The A and the C types, as it says, are found in significant portions outside East Asia. That is, in Europeans and Americans. Okay, so A and C predominantly in East Asia, in Europeans and Americans, predominantly outside East Asia in Europeans and Americans. In contrast, the B type is the most common type in East Asia. And its ancestral genome appears not to have spread outside East Asia without first mutating into derived B types, pointing to founder effects or immunological or environmental resistance against this type outside of Asia. That's really important. Point being, B is the type that's in China, predominantly. However, you've got A and C, which, by the way, are the ancestral ones tied to the coronavirus and bat scenario that are predominantly in Europe and America, right? So the original, seem to be predominantly in Europe and America, while the B type, which is the newer version, is predominantly in Asia, and it says pointing to founder effects or immunological or environmental resistance against this type outside of Asia, almost as if it's an ethnically focused version. Think about that, right? Now, this could be wrong. They could lie. They could be lying. This could be a co-opted, manipulated shell media. A number of things. You should always be questioning this stuff. But the study is saying pretty clearly that the predominant type that's being found in Asia is pretty much predominantly only in Asia, and that is the newer version, the older original versions of the coronavirus bat scenario, the ones that would have jumped from human to, or animal to human, the very same thing we're having trouble finding in China, by the way, seemingly happened in Europe and America. All right, so that's what the abstract is saying. Now, here is the group. Oh, dang it, I lost the highlight here. Right there, I believe. This is from University of Cambridge. This is the study that they were referencing in this article. There's what it says. COVID-19 genetic network analysis provides snapshot of pandemic origins. Now, what it says, the team used data from virus genomes sampled from across the world between December 24th and March 4th. So, a good broad swath and pretty recent. Now, the research, and this was all the way to March 2020. Now, the research revealed 3 distinct variants of COVID-19 consisting of clusters closely related lineages, which they labeled A, B, and C, which is what we're just talking about. Now, Forrester and colleagues found that the closest type of COVID-19 to the one discovered in bats Type A, the original human virus genome, was present in Wuhan, but surprisingly not the city's predominant virus type. Now, as I said, there has been spread of smaller degrees, but the predominant is the point. So versions of A were seen in Chinese individuals, and Americans reported to have lived in Wuhan, and mutated versions of A were found in patents from the US and Australia. Wuhan's major virus type, B, was prevalent in patients from across East Asia. However, the variant didn't travel much beyond the region without further mutations, implying a founder event in Wuhan or resistance against this type of COVID-19 East Asia, says researchers. Okay, so the point is, again, I'll finish with the number. It says the C variant is the major European type, found in early patients from France, Italy, Sweden, and England. It is absent from the study's Chinese mainland sample, but seen in Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea. Now, how does that even make sense? This is what Buttar was saying as well. How in the world does something like this jump over all of these places all the way to foreign countries? It doesn't make any sense. But again, the same point is that predominantly B is in Asia, which is seemingly not going anywhere else. Meanwhile, A is the original tied back to the bat scenario, right? So how does that make sense? How can A, and this is what the Taiwanese virologists were saying all those times ago we were talking about it, right? He said it's basic. It's like the alphabet. It's like, you know that these things come in certain order, right? So if B, which is the newer version, is in Asia and nowhere else for the most part, how do you explain that? How do you then explain that Europe and America have type A more so than anywhere else, which are the original? I mean, guys, this is basic stuff. Now, by the way, there may be an explanation for this. Somebody out there may have an answer, and maybe there's more to the story, as always. I just really hope that I don't have to start, I hope we get to a point where I don't have to say that every single time on the show. And that's more so for the new people out there, not those of you that have always been here. But the idea is that you have to consider this information while keeping an open mind for things that may not be there to be seen. But I personally, in this moment, do not see any way this makes sense. It seems pretty damn obvious to me that this suggests this started outside of China, at the very least. But guess what? This won't get talked about, as it never really does. Now, on the same, somebody actually just sent me this today, just a clip they took from something they took off a search. But again, it was the same point that I'm always showing you guys. In this same time frame, the idea that we know that the different variants are now showing that it clearly most likely didn't start in China and most likely started either in Europe and the United States. Then we have the fact that the US government is clearly lying about this. They knew about this in November. They were talking about it in November. They were warning about it in November. People were selling stocks. We know that they knew about this ahead of time. Then it needs to bring us back to the concept of the mysterious vaping illness that was happening all across this country. Or rather, it was in most places they just said, oh, it's a severe flu. Specifically around Fort Detrick, they had the mysterious vaping illness, which just so happened to have the exact same symptoms of coronavirus, right down to COVID-19, right down to the ground glass opacity in the lungs. But if you look at this, you can see there was a lot going on that nobody wanted to talk about. Here, most of these are December, but you have to realize if you're having, as the first one says, flu cases in New York City spike early as deaths climb across the U.S. in December, that means it started before December. This was getting bad in December. Flu season arrives early, driven by an unexpected virus. Unusual type of flu virus is dominating early start. I mean, guys, Italian scientists investigate possible. It's everywhere. I mean, at this point, you literally have to be actively, aggressively trying not to see things to ignore this part of the story. There is so much showing the timeline is wrong. The origin is wrong, but they've already invested everything in China bad guy, China did it. And they're just pushing it in. That being the case, how do you explain all this? How do you explain the lies? How do you explain all of this mysterious stuff happening beforehand? How do you explain any number of things that point to the fact very clearly, at the very least, that we should be asking these questions? Here's another interesting tidbit for you to think about. CDC labs were contaminated, delaying coronavirus tests, officials say. This is a reasonably new story. This is from April 18th. I mean, this is just embarrassing. Now, there's so many places you could take this discussion. The bottom line is the CDC. And you should think of this as ridiculous as, so which was this one? This one, they did absolutely crazy things over there in that lab, right? This is the same kind of thing we're talking about here. CDC labs where they're working with coronavirus, right? One of the very, and it's, same discussion they had about I forget who reported that. The idea that the Wuhan lab was, they had containment issues. Yeah, just like Fort Detrick and a lot of these places. They try to make it seem like that's the only place. But, and I argue the reason they said that about the place, which they probably did, was just to pull the attention away from how there's an obvious trail from Fort Detrick. But these labs were contaminated. These are the very group, the CDC of all people, the very group that's supposed to be leading this charge in this country, and they were contaminated because they were being sloppy. And they delaying the coronavirus testing, which again, I think is intentional because they clearly don't want to really see the full picture. And in fact, they seemingly sent these things out and ended up having they're contaminated these tests. It's embarrassing. But we need to think about how this reflects on everything else. Such as Fort Detrick having containment issues, such as the fact that this is a prolific problem in this country where these very groups that are supposed to be the ones controlling these things are seemingly throwing things out with the trash, as Whitney Webb reported. Oh, it was Ebola we just threw out with the trash or something. That was an actual quote from Fort Detrick. These are the people that we should be looking at. Why? Because we're Americans, and these are people that are doing things right next to us that are potentially putting us in danger. And then we should think about how that may relate to the larger story. But regardless of coronavirus, this should make you very uncomfortable. But it should also make you remember an older story that ties back to the CDC that I just thought was relevant to mention, seeing as how we're dealing with vaccines today. And this is the very group that's going to be leading the charge with your vaccines. CDC scientists admits data of vaccines and autism was trashed, right? This started the whole vaxxed idea and the documentary and autism tied to vaccines. And we're all crazy, right? No, we're not. And this was covered up just like everything else, and the evidence was there, and you were gaslit because you're not listening to mainstream scientists, which is where we are right now. If you dare question mainstream doctors, sort of how if you dare question government officials, if you dare question the media, journalists, if you dare question anybody official, well, then you're endangering everybody. Well, that's a perfect way to hide the truth. It's a perfect way to stop us from talking about things until it's too late, which is exactly what Fauci said, right? Well, let's wait until it's over and you can write your books about it. Well, that's perfect. Let's wait until they initiate all the authoritarian measures that we can never come back from, and then we'll just write books about how our world changed forever. That's what we'll do. Thanks, Fauci. All right, that's what they're saying. Wait. Just wait.